Hello, welcome to Talk Time. And this week, we're going to take a look at the International Monetary Fund. What is the International Monetary Fund? What has it been doing in Ghana? How come that in the last elections, the New Patriotic Party gave the indication that it will have nothing or very little to do with the International Monetary Fund and is gone back into the embrace of the IMF? What did the Mahama administration agree with the IMF? Was it in the national interest or was it inimical to the national interest? This is what we're looking at this week. Welcome to Talk Time.
It's a beautiful day. I'm gonna make most of it. It's a beautiful day. A day to share with you. You make my world go round. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really got me saying, nice girl brings home happiness, brings home happiness.
Experience the wide range of top quality and affordable electronics, phones, tablets, home and office appliances from NASCO. NASCO, bring home happiness.
Hello and welcome back to Talk Time. And as I indicated from the beginning, we are taking a look at the International Monetary Fund. What is the International Monetary Fund? What has it been doing in Ghana and elsewhere? Why did the Mahama administration find it necessary to make a deal with the IMF, and why did the MPP complain so much about the deal that the Mahama administration made? In any case, last week the IMF was in town, and we understand that there is what they call an exit report. What does this exit report say? What commitments have the new administration made, and so on? These are all interesting matters that we'll be delving with this week on Talk Time. And it's my special privilege to introduce our guest for today, the Honorable Isaac Adongo, Member of Parliament for Bolgatenga Central. So you're welcome to the studio.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
nice
Yes,
to
sir.
meet you.
Broadly speaking, what is the IMF? I mean, what does it do?
Yes, the IMF is a body that has been put together by the world in order to provide the opportunity for countries across the world to have a mechanism through which we can provide the right global financial and economic environment. And so the IMF and its members are concerned with individual countries' financial health and, by extension, the health of the economy globally. And so what the IMF has been doing over the years has been to provide technical support to countries in areas of fiscal management, in areas of monetary policy, in areas of ensuring financial stability, and in most instances also to promote good corporate governance across the world. And so in Ghana, we've had several checkered experience with the IMF. Only recently, when we went into the heavily indebted poor country initiative, around the time there was this global wind blowing across the African continent in particular, stemming from some of the challenges that the African continent had experienced. You'll recall that in the late 90s, we had very serious challenges to do with world commodity prices. Gold prices started tumbling, cocoa prices started tumbling, oil prices started tumbling. And in Ghana in particular, we experienced, for instance, the challenge we had with our own golden hen, the hen that laid the golden egg, the now Anglo Gold Ashanti, then Goldfields. You recall that gold prices dropped so much so that the price of Goldfields at the time, the share price dropped all the way from $20 to $2.6. And you recall that threatened the survival of Goldfields itself, to the extent that minority shareholders of about 4% took a class action to try and fight the management. You know, under company law, they say majority rule, but minority interest must be protected. And at the time, the main reason was that we had a very huge hole in our hedge books. what did that mean? What it meant was that in order to address the tumbling prices, Gold Fields decided to basically sell its gold in advance. So they entered into an agreement, agreed a price today to deliver over a number of years. And so suddenly when the price of gold began to appreciate, it means that they were in an unfavorable position because the prices were now appreciating. And to keep those hedge contracts or future contracts functional, there will always be the need to have some monies paid into an escrow account. So for instance, if we agree that the price from the start is about $20 per ounce, and the price goes up by $30 to $30, it means that there may not be the motivation on the part of the seller to still sell to you at $20. So you pay a certain percentage of that into an escrow account, we'll call it a margin account, so that anytime you are in an unfavorable position, you make some payment upfront in order to provide liquidity so that when you have to settle, the balance will not be easy, will not be difficult for you. So Gold Fields was called upon to make those margin calls of about $250 million. Unfortunately, they didn't have the liquidity. We all saw what happened. The current Minister of Finance at the time, plus one of our best finance experts, Jude Buckner, provided experts consultancy advice to His Excellency the President at the time, J.D. John Rawlings, and we realized that we had to sell. So we sold Gold Fields to become Anglo Gold Ashanti, but we made sure that we created a unique shareholding arrangement called the Golden Share. What it meant was that we were not happy to let go, but under the circumstances, that was the best option. So we let it go, but we had a veto, the only unique share you could find around the world. That gave us, even though we're the minority, if we didn't agree to management decision, it wasn't going to be possible to sell. And so these were some of the challenges that we faced. And so by 2001, most countries across the world had to be borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to support their budget. And Ghana fell into that trap where we had to be supported with debt relief and all that. So we have continued that until we exited in 2006. By the end of 2006, it was quite clear that the economy hadn't developed the capacity to be self-sustaining. Over the couple of years that we're getting 40% support from our donors to fund our budget with all the reliefs, we didn't build the capacity to be able to replace those sources of revenue once we exited. And you realize from 2007, immediately after we exited, we're back to the same place. We had to sell everything and asset. We're now using divestiture proceeds to fund our budget. So you remember we had to sell our national assets. So we sold Vodafone, Ghana Telecom at the time. We sold Westel at the time. In fact, we sold the Golden Share. And that is what makes it strange when I heard recently that Nana Addo, when he was addressing the Adansehene and his team, assured him that he would do everything to revamp Anglo Gold Ashanti. What is your interest? You have no shares in Anglo Gold Ashanti. You've sold the Golden Share. Now, we can't do anything about it. No, but I was happy that he indicated that he will continue the steps that were taken by His Excellency John Dramani Mahama to try and protect the concession that was being, invaded by Galamseyers and all of that, and to make sure that they are able to keep their properties and to continue to operate. So this is where we have come. By 2008, when the MPP was exiting office, it had become very, very clear that funding the budget of Ghana was becoming a challenge.
We will come to all of that.
Yeah, so
we will come to all of that. For now, I want to understand, if all the IMF does is to provide expert advice, and we have all the universities we have here, with all the professors in economics and law and so on, why is the IMF relevant if we have our own experts? If we understand our own economic situation better, that they can understand, why do we have to go to the IMF?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid question. The IMF comes to a country with some added advantage. You may have your own experts, you may have your own expertise locally, but the international investor community has confidence in IMF as a body that assures them and gives them the comfort of their investment in the country. When the IMF is with you, it provides an additional credibility to your programs. It provides additional comfort to donors to want to deal with you. It gives an indication that you are willing to work as part of the international community to shape the destiny of your country. Some people may not have the same appetite for IMF, but it depends on where you are at what point in time. If you recall, by 2012, coupled with the challenges of the global economic environment, you remember in 2011, we recorded one of the best growth. Of course, that was driven largely by the level of investment that had come into the oil sector with the FPSO and all of that. And so we registered a very significant growth, and also supported by the real sector of the economy, we registered a very robust growth. By 2012, you began to see that all the challenges that we're having, particularly the price of cocoa was beginning to suffer again, the price of gold, and we all recall how the mining companies had to basically shut down. And so that was posing a big problem for our revenue sources. We had a challenge even with the oil that we had started to produce. The price of oil was beginning to drop. In fact, 2 years later, the minister had to go to Parliament within 2 months of implementing a new budget to make a policy statement. And that was when it became clear that just within 2 months of implementing the budget, Ghana was going to lose $700 million from the fall in the price of oil. Now, that coupled with the deficit that we had in 2012, it became clearer that the international community was becoming a bit worried. It was very difficult for us now going into the market to seek the capital markets to raise funding. It was becoming very expensive. And so you needed to have that moderating influence and the signaling influence of the IMF in order that the global investing community will be comfortable enough to give us loans at a much more reduced rate. But to do that, we had to also ensure that the policies were driven largely by our homegrown policy. You remember we went to Senchi and had a consensus over the key areas that we needed to factor into the program. And we were able to convince the IMF to accept most of them. Sometimes some people call them conditionalities, but I don't see what a conditionality is. If you have headache and I'm giving you a drug that is bitter, and you say it is bitter, so because of that, you know, I'm compelling you to take it. If you don't take it, we will see what will happen to your headache. So if there are certain actions that as Ghanaians we needed to take, and we had postponed them over the years, and now needed to face them head on. One of it was the fact that over the last 10 or so years, we have had to get only 6% of donor funding to our budget. Even that has not been regular. Now, compared to 40% funding between 2001 and 2008, you are now dealing with 6% funding. Now, the funding requirement of Ghana had gone up quite significantly because we had started the implementation of our single spine pay policy from the Ghana investor salary structure. And immediately our wage bill shot up from 1.9 billion in 2008 to something in the region of 10 to 11 billion. That is huge. So that funding had to be met. Where were we going to get that funding? We also suddenly realized that we needed to fast track the elimination of the infrastructure deficit. Today, I have heard some free HSS, and I was very impressed because now it is easier because John Mahama has left almost 160,000 places for senior secondary school children. That is the level of infrastructure deficit that had to be eliminated. Today, you can find hospitals across the country that didn't exist some years ago. That had to be addressed. Today, our road network, even though still very bad, has improved significantly. So all that had to be met. Our energy sector had suffered lack of investment for so many years. And so we needed to aggressively pursue an expansion of our energy sector in order that the capacity will be increased. And you were dealing with something in the region of 1,800 megawatts of power when we needed to accelerate that by at least 10% to 12% additional investment every year. So for 8 years, we didn't invest that. That already amounted to close to a doubling of the energy requirement. So you saw Doomsaw started, and we needed to address that head on. Today, we are dealing with close to 4,000 megawatts on the ground. I mean, if all the projects on the ground are completed. So we needed to address all of this. Now we couldn't get the cheap money anymore. What did we have to do? We needed to take those difficult decisions. So the IMF program came with the sole objective of trying to help us identify areas where we could raise the revenue in order to slow down the deficit so that we don't keep adding too much onto the debt, what we call the fiscal consolidation effort. So IMF program wanted to help us in that respect. And that had to be anchored on a law because the Public Financial Administration Act and the pieces of legislation were not strong enough to ensure the transparency and the fiscal policy credibility that we needed. So we needed to have a comprehensive law. And that's why we put together the Public Financial Management Act to anchor fiscal policy and fiscal management on a proper law that was strong. We also needed to ensure that there was financial stability. Over the years, because of the challenge of providing adequate resources to state-owned enterprises that are involved in the energy sector, particularly GridCo, VRA, and ECG, they had to resort to the banks. And they were now heavily indebted to the banks to the extent that these banks' own survival were being threatened. And if these banks went aground, you could see what would happen to people's savings and you could see what would happen to the financial markets. So we needed to ensure financial stability. Again, a solution had to be found. Within the monetary policy framework, we needed to find a way to deal with the challenges that was emanating from our external unfavorable position. That is to say, our imports, we're not getting much from our exports, but our import bill kept going up. So what did we have to do? We needed to find a way to ensure that we stabilize the city because the city suffered significantly from these external shocks. So we needed to stabilize the city. And in stabilizing the city, we also had to make sure that the central bank was autonomous, truly autonomous. We needed to ensure that the central bank itself, its own inflation targeting mechanism, and its monetary policy itself was independent or didn't have so much influence on fiscal policy. By that, what did we mean? The central bank was beginning to become the sole financier of government budget. And that meant expansion of monetary supply, leading to further inflation. Oftentimes, you had printing of money that could occur when central bank is funded. We needed to moderate that influence on fiscal policy. And so all these had to be anchored on law. And that is why we had to pass the amendment to the Bank of Ghana Act to give the tenure of the central banker much more firmer root, to ensure that the board was quite independent, and to ensure that going forward, central bank did not become the key determinant of how government of Ghana financed its budget. And that's why you remember the zero financing issue came in, but eventually the Parliament of Ghana approved a 5% funding of the budget. So these were the issues that we had to deal with. The revenue sources, and to see how we could manage expenditure. And in managing expenditure, we had to introduce the GIFMIS project, which is an information management system that allows us to have a complete eye view of our finances across the country. And if that is fully rolled out, it will make it almost impossible for expenditures to be incurred without the knowledge of the Minister of Finance, for instance, without the collaboration of Bank of Ghana and the Controller and Accountant General. And it will make the generation of reports that should support financial operations of government much easier. So these were some of the areas that we needed consultancy on.
Now, sir, you keep mentioning the international community and the international investing community and so on. What is that?
Because we no longer had access to concessionary facilities from the World Bank, from the IMF, we needed now to go to the capital market. And when you are going to the capital market, how much you pay for monies that are given to you to invest in your country in infrastructure, in healthcare, and the rest will depend on your perceived risk profile. Of course, investors will demand more if you are seen to be risky, and will demand less if you are seen to be less risky. So everything that you do, now that you don't have the muscle, the financial muscle domestically to finance some of these projects and will look to the capital market, you needed to consider actions that will give them the comfort and to create the impression that, or to give them the feeling that your country is less risky to invest.
So who is them? Is it the international community or the international investing community?
Investing community.
Yeah. What is that?
That is the people across the world that have the pool of funds and are looking for areas to invest in.
Would that include, for example, Chinese state corporations? Would that
Chinese
corporations? Would that include Russian state actors?
Would that
other. Include, for example, Iranian state actors?
Yes.
And would they be looking up to IMF, for approval?
they won't be looking up to IMF for approval, but in evaluating your risk situation, they are looking at what is happening in country. But they have that feeling that once IMF is there, whatever IMF tells you, you can take it. So you don't need to do a lot of work on the country if you have IMF. Let me give you examples.
Isn't it just possible that we are tied to the IMF because the investment community we are looking up to is in the metropolitan countries, France, Germany, and so on? Because if you're looking to China, you don't need the approval of the IMF.
Yeah, it's not, you see, you can place your investment anywhere. Now, when you are on the Euro market, and when we say Euro market, it's not a specific location. It simply connotes, what do you call it, mopping up resources from outside of your country. You have, China has its own mechanism of supporting countries, of lending to countries. Often, it is painfully slow. If you remember our own experience with the $3 billion, it can be very slow. And the requirements can be so cumbersome that you may not be able to have a shorter lead time to get the money in order to support the interventions that you are interested in. So there are all these things that you have to consider. Now, I am saying that when the IMF is with you and somebody wants to invest in your country, and
from the West.
Yeah, from the West.
Certain ideological bloc.
Yes, I agree.
Yes.
And you can actually come from Ghana and you want to invest, but you still want to look up to what reports you have on the country. Does that give you an assurance that when you spend your money here, you will get it back? Does it give you the assurance that the monies are going to be put to good use? Does it give you the assurance that there is some restraining element within the confines of financial governance of the country that gives you that comfort? So you need to look at that. And I will give you an example. Recently, I know we'll come to those, but recently, you remember when His Excellency Dr. Bawumia made that statement, and I call it reckless, that some 7 billion couldn't be accounted for. Immediately, the international community got worried. The yield on Ghana's bond for 2023 within 3 days shot up by 4%. That is how they perceive the risk. Because if there is a head of the economic management team saying this, will you send your money there when 7 billion cannot be accounted for? You will be worried. So immediately it shot up. Look, on a $1 billion loan, that is already 400 million cost in interest. He did it to us when he was in opposition. Anytime we were interested in raising money, he would say these things to heighten the risk. And he did it to his own government. If you look at the report that was issued, no 7 billion was unaccounted for. The IMF confirmed the position of the Minister of Finance that there were some outstanding obligations and commitments. They are not the same as unaccounted for monies. The senior minister indicated that, in fact, Ghana was going to suffer some penalties for misreporting. As at the release of this report, no such thing happened. So when you have two key figures make pronouncements that suggest unpatriotic appetite for their own country's survival because they want to nail a previous government, that is the risk you get. And then they will go out there to raise money and they will have to now face the consequences of the 4%. They will need to pay more. Because people will say, you said 7 billion was unaccounted for. Do you still stand by your words? If you say no, can we trust you? Because you can't say one thing today and say the other tomorrow. Now, how are you going to convince them that 7 billion will be accounted for? And why should I send my money to a country where 7 billion cannot be accounted for? But that is what he did when he was in opposition. He will mention the debt situation of Ghana to be 39.5 billion. Ghana government and the Bank of Ghana reports 26.5. The investing community asks questions. 13 billion cannot be found. Can I trust this country? So they must pay more. And Ghana government suffered. Very unpatriotic approach. Today he's in government, he's done the same. And you see the Minister of Finance was at pains for several weeks doing the PR to try and moderate the impact of that, engaging Reuters and other international media houses to try and moderate that. And the IMF report has vindicated our position that no 7 billion was missing. And so that is the level at which dealing with IMF. Now the international community will be more interested in what IMF says. And once IMF makes a pronouncement on that 7 billion and it shows that no, this is not true, then of course the international community will be more comfortable. And they need that referee in order to have the confidence. And it is because of the huge challenges that we have had to go through. And so now that the IMF program was picking up, in fact, the IMF indicated, even though the growth is not what we expected, that the growth that was recorded was above their expectation, their focus. But we were made to believe that Ghana was missing it by the Minister of Finance. Yes, when we were leaving government, we gave an estimate of between 8.5 to 9% of deficit. But they made people to believe that it was going to be in the double digits. In the end, what we told them was what was confirmed. And so we now have a situation where a group of people who demonized the IMF program, who created the impression that the IMF was a monster that had arrived here, and for which reason the IMF had to be kicked out, because they have the magic wand. In fact, they are lucky to have His Excellency Dr. Bahomia. And so they didn't need the IMF. And throughout the vetting of the senior minister and that of the finance minister, they categorically said they will have to do something about it. What was the review? What were their proposals? In the end, the IMF left with a report that suggested that 3 key critical areas that were agreed are still the focus. And that is fiscal consolidation, and that is financial stability, and that is ensuring that monetary policy is further tightened to bring inflation down further. So these are the issues we have to deal with. They don't have any solution other than what the incompetent John Mahama left.
Well, viewers, we are in conversation with Honorable Isaac Adongo, the NDC Member of Parliament for Bolgatanga Central. And we are talking generally about the International Monetary Fund and its relations with Ghana. We're going to go on a short commercial break, and when we come back, I'd like to look at some of the criticisms of the Mahama administration's deal with the IMF, whether indeed they were valid or not valid, and how all of those things are panning out today in the negotiations between the Akufo-Addo-led government and the same institution, the International Monetary Fund. Short break.
How much is this?
600.
Wonderful. I think I'll take this one.
But what's your size?
44.
This is 43. I could get you 44. This is the man. Your home of quality shoes from the UK. We have various shoes for the office, for your formal and casual occasions. Visit the man in Abelemkpe. Our office is located just behind Aquatech. Our telephone numbers are 020-873-7166. You can also reach us on our landline 0302-730-760. We'll be expecting you.
Hello and welcome back to Talk Time, and we are in conversation with the Honorable Isaac Adongo, Member of Parliament for Bolga Central, Honorable Isaac Adongo. And we are looking at the International Monetary Fund and its dealings with Ghana. Now, sir, in the agreement between the Mahama administration and the International Monetary Fund, were there conditionalities? And what made these conditionalities be?
Well, I stated earlier that you may prefer to call them conditionalities. I will call them the necessary difficult decisions that had to be taken in order to put the economy back on track. And if those turn out to be conditionalities, I think that is good. In the first place, we needed to find internal sources of revenue because it was not sustainable to continue to borrow more on account of a budget deficit. So you needed to find a way to rake in more revenue, to plug the loophole that we suffered from the occasional drop in the price of commodities on the world market, and also to cater for the drop in the donor funding arrangement that we had. And so to that extent, measures were put in place to try and ensure that we are able to shore up domestic revenue. Some of the arrangement included ensuring aggressive compliance with tax laws, ensuring that the tax collection and administration itself was effective and efficient. And so you look into the bringing together of the Internal Revenue Service, the Customs Division, and the Value-Added Tax to form a Ghana Revenue Authority that had the potential of sharing information and working together much more closely to improve revenue collection and compliance. So we needed to look at that. We also had to look at a number of new taxes that could help us shore up revenue. Now, some of those taxes were meant to achieve a dual purpose. For instance, the energy sector levy. It was meant to ensure that we were able to provide resources that helped the SOEs to pay off their indebtedness to the banks. Now, that would then mean that the banks would have reduced significantly the loans on their books that were going bad, what we call the non-performing asset or non-performing loans. And once they got that, what it simply means that these banks will have more liquidity, and so they will now have to give them out at lower interest rates. So interest rates would go down on account of the fact that the banks now have more resources from the loans that were not performing. But it also means that once these institutions that were the subject of these loans, that is Gridco, VRA, and the ECG, were able to pay off these loans through the levy, they will now have a clean bill of health, a clean balance sheet, and can now be able to engage in the kinds of activities that will help them to further stabilize and improve the energy sector. So that was a clear objective of instituting one of them. So the IMF would come and say, okay, you have a problem with financial stability. There is also the problem of the energy sector. How do we address that? Can we find a way that Ghanaians will support us to pay for this in order that the system doesn't collapse, in order that doomsday will become a thing of the past, in order that we have a much, much stronger balance sheet for these institutions? In fact, there was even the talk of eventually bringing the energy sector entities under one holding company that has the capacity to use its resources and leverage to get cheaper funding for them. For instance, GMPC. GMPC has the capacity to raise loans at 2%, 3%. Why leave GMPC only for VRA to go and borrow at 12%, 10%? So if we could have GMPC bring all these balance sheets together, it would then use a stronger financial model to give Ghana a better deal. So all that, these type of permutations were being considered. So that is one solution that you would find. The other solution that you find is also that, look, your imports are very high. You want to be able to help your local manufacturing companies. Would you rather allow goods to come in without any taxes, or you still generate revenue from there whilst protecting your local company? So import duties have to be imposed for a dual purpose of increasing revenue that would improve the fiscal consolidation, but also give opportunity to local companies to take advantage of the additional market that it provides. But what that also means is that it helps you to conserve your foreign currency, and in the end, you are able to achieve the stability of the city. And only yesterday, the IMF report indicated that we had a surplus on our current account. That is a very good sign that the program is making progress. Now, you also have to look at the issue of managing your finances. We have been using a cash-based accounting system for years. What that means is, if government awards a project and the project is being executed, until you pay for it, it doesn't pop up in your accounts. So you live as if you don't owe anybody. Meanwhile, you owe. So you have to move to a system that is able to give you a proper view of your obligation. So I have paid for this, I still owe this. Or I still need to make financial arrangement to complete the rest of it, which we call the commitment. So we have to move gradually towards what we call the accrual base of accounting, where once you award a contract, you have a complete view of your obligations to the end of the completion of the project, whether or not you have paid for it. And that system, which we call the gift miss, has that model of contracting, which gives us that information. Indeed, it is because of that the MPP government were able to find the obligations and commitments that were outstanding in the system. Okay, so that gives you a handle on the management of your expenditure. It gives you a handle on the approval process so that nobody can just get up and sign a contract without clearance from the Ministry of Finance and from the higher authority that handles and manages the budget. The challenge is that we have not been able to fully roll out GIFMIS to all the MMDAs. This year, there was a program to roll out to about 50 of the municipal and district assemblies. And funding permitting 2008, you would have gone through all the 216. And if that is done, it will mean that every district assembly, municipal assembly, and government agencies will be working to a server sitting in Accra. And so the Minister of Finance can, if you want to get information on any MDA, can easily go into the system and have a bird's eye view. And if you want to drill further, he can ask the staff to drill further and give him as much detail as he wants. So that improves the financial management architecture. And that is why the policy objective under fiscal consolidation is fiscal credibility. And one of the challenges was because we were not able to have certainty in our budgeting process. You budget and you say, I want to do A, B, C, and E, and I'm expecting to release 200 million to an institution. It doesn't get happen. It creates uncertainty. Okay, it creates credibility problems. How do we address that? So we needed to bring some more certainty into the budgeting and budget execution process so that people just don't have budgets that don't end up executed because they don't get the resources for it. I was happy that in the report, the government says that it wants to find a way to review earmarking of revenue. When we say earmarking of revenues, we are talking about the statutory funds. So you take, for instance, National Health Insurance levy, it's a dedicated funding arrangement. If you take the GET fund, it's a dedicated fund, common fund. Now the challenge is, sometimes that can influence your cash flow. You have money sitting there for a particular activity that is not yet due, and yet you are borrowing money to fund another activity that is due because this money is tied to a particular activity and earmarked. And so you want to find out whether it will be proper to move your resources around as and when your cash flow needs arise, so that you don't have government of Ghana having idle funds sitting somewhere and the same government of Ghana borrowing money from another place. Now the challenge of that is, if you don't also take care, critical sectors of the economy may have their funding falling due, and at that point in time there won't be money for them. So how to balance that is a very major issue that we need to address. But going forward, we then pass the Public Financial Management Act that is supposed to give effect to much more stringent budgeting. So that is why in the Public Financial Management Act itself, we've made provision for multi-year expenditure framework. So if I'm awarding a contract today, I need to demonstrate in my budget the impact it will have next year and the following year until I finish executing it. So you have a clear view of the entire spectrum of expenditures to the end of the project. And that is the legacy of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. And if you listen to the Minister of Finance, he consistently makes the point that his government will want to ensure fiscal policy credibility. He would like to ensure transparency. These are the policy briefs of the Public Financial Management Act. You can find out the memo that was sent to Parliament that accompanied the bill. Precisely what they are saying. So there's nothing new. Now, the other issue that is also interesting is that, speaking to the IMF, he made it very clear that he has given copies of the Public Financial Management Act to the ministry, department, and agents as if they are Bibles. That is again the legacy of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. So anything about fiscal policy credibility that this government talks about, transparency that they talk about, it's exactly the work that His Excellency John Dramani Mahama did, which resulted in a law that was passed in August last year and assented to in October. That law is now being recognized by everybody as one of the best laws that can improve financial governance. If you look at the issue of financial stability, again, the Minister of Finance makes it emphatically clear that the energy sector levy is the way to go. Again, one of the areas that John Mahama was lambasted, being incompetent and a lazy way of managing the economy. Today, he's been vindicated because the Minister of Finance says there is no way they can do without the energy sector levy. And it was referred to as a nuisance tax. When you come to the fight against the fallen cedi, which is again another area that the IMF program is worried about, the stability of the cedi. Only recently, the Minister of Finance was asked how he was going to deal with it. And he said Ghana is going to rely more on gas that will come from the Sankofa fields. And therefore, we will not be spending more money to buy crude. That is his panacea for stability of the city. Again, a legacy of His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. That cannot be incompetence. He says they will look to agriculture to be able to provide more support to the city. And if you listen to the Minister of Agriculture when he was being vetted, he said his priority was to implement the NDC policy of putting across all the country the farmer services centers. These farmer services centers is our original idea. The president cut a sword for one in Busa North. I mean Busa South to be precise. Is that the incompetence? And this is what is going to inform the stability of the city. Beyond that, I haven't heard anything new. And so the IMF program, the language, the intentions, and the objective has been the singing of the MPP every day. And yet, when they come to the public, they pretend as if they are saying anything new. I don't see anything new. The Bank of Ghana, you can see because of this law, it is the only institution that has not suffered from the upheavals because the law provides security of tenure for the central bank governor. Otherwise, if you touch the central bank governor, the signaling effect across the world, even the banking industry of Ghana, there will be no confidence. So you won't touch it. The Monetary Policy Committee is supposed to be an independent body that does an efficient assessment of our economy. And all of that, the ultimate objective is to improve our inflation targeting framework so that in the end, inflation can come down. We can properly estimate inflation. We can properly communicate inflation, and we can manage people's sentiments and expectations about inflation in order that inflation will begin to be held in check. And you can see, since we started implementing the program, inflation is assuming a downward trend. Now, the biggest challenge is fiscal consolidation. If you promise to cut everything tax, which is your revenue that the people of Ghana have agreed that under the circumstances, they are willing to give to you to support the resuscitation of the economy and to grow the economy. And you say you don't want that money. Now you are also promising so much expenditures. The question then is, what type of fiscal space are you looking for? The only fiscal space you can be looking for now is to borrow. And that is the reason this hoax of a $7 billion was brought up. First, to court sympathy from the International Monetary Fund. Two, to court sympathy from the people of Ghana so that if they don't deliver, we will say, oh, they met a messy situation. But thirdly, to find an excuse to go after and terminate John Mahama projects. And I can assure you that every single figure in the 7 billion Ghana cedis are projects that are not funded. When we say projects are not funded, they are projects that are not tied to a dedicated source of funding. For instance, a loan from Brazil and all. These are projects that you need to fund from your annual government of Ghana domestic revenue. And these are the projects they are targeting to terminate under the pretext of value for money. So they can now create the fiscal space. Okay, so you want to abandon projects that the people of Ghana voted for a president to deliver in 4 years. And he delivered up to a point you are supposed to continue. You want to terminate them so you can now do your one district, one factory, and your one village, one dam. That is not a prudent way of managing public resources. That public resources already pumped into these projects must go waste in order for you to engage in political propaganda. And it is a shame that we found senior members of government join in this chorus of 7 billion unaccounted for money. Why is it that suddenly they've stopped talking about it? Because they knew it was a very bad situation. And we, the people of Ghana, are very focused and will be monitoring what they'll be doing with those projects. Because those projects must be charged to the government of Ghana budget for 2017 so that they can be properly completed. And if there are residues, it should move into 2018. Then they can find space and do their own thing. But they have to focus on how they'll be raising the revenue to fund government projects. And I do believe that once they have agreed to go on with the IMF program, and I said it before, that they had no choice. The international investing community would have blacklisted Ghana. Ghana would have borrowed at 25% on a dollar. No government worth a salt would do that damage to itself. So we knew that they were just talking, but in the end, the whole world was watching. And the level of uncertainty that occasioned some of these comments resulted in the inflows to Ghana dropping significantly, with the city suffering the pain it is suffering.
Now, Honorable, did the IMF at any point insist on a freeze on public sector employment? And how did that affect the well-being of the people of Ghana?
It is very interesting. I want to tie this. I do recall Bawumia said that several scores of workers were going to be fired in 2017 under the IMF program.
That's retrenchment.
Yes, retrenchment. He said several of them. And that wasn't true. It was a political talk. We want him today to come in and say that having agreed to the IMF program, are we retrenching people in 2017? Where in the agreement did he find that? Because you can't be dishonest as a president, as a vice president. You just can't do that. And we want to be sure that if he says A, he can stand by it all the time. But one of the biggest challenges we had with our wage bill was what IMF sought to help us to deal with. At a certain point, our wage bill was taking almost 60% of our domestic revenue. That is not sustainable. And so you needed to find a way to contain, and that the operative word was to contain the ballooning wage bill. One of the challenges that we needed to confront was to come to terms with the fact that several years ago, when we undertook the structural adjustment program under the economic recovery program, the main focus of Ghana at that time was to produce a lean but efficient public sector. By 2000, when NDC was leaving office, we had left a lean public sector, numbering around 200,000 workers. Because some people were asked...
Because we had sacked about 300,000 workers.
Yeah, we had to what do you call, rationalize the sector in order to have... Because we can't imagine that today, 600,000 people are taking almost 30% of the national budget. 600,000 people. It's not sustainable. So we needed to find a way to contain this wage bill, but also to find a way to support the private sector to create the sustainable jobs that we can create as a country, so that the burden on the public purse will be reduced. Because the wage bill, together with interest costs, is already crowding out about 50% of national resources. Our entire budget, including the deficit. So we needed to find a way to address this. So our objective at that point was, what do we do? Because the more numbers you add on, the higher the wage bill. And did we have the resources to do that? And we cannot be borrowing to pay workers, because workers must be paid based on productivity, must be paid based on the ability for the economy domestically to support them, and not to look outside to support labor. So it was quite clear that we could not continue with that. So as part of the program, we agreed a period within which we would do what we call net freeze. By net freeze means that you would be replacing workers that have gone on retirement, but occasionally you will be able to recruit very critical staff. So for instance, if you take the security services, they were not affected. They were still recruiting on an annual basis based on their demand or their requirement. We got an approval to recruit health workers, and I do believe that this will continue in this government, where some health workers who had left school about 2-3 years back will be absorbed into the system. Thirdly, there was also an agreement, because of the fact that the agriculture sector had to be given a major focus, to recruit close to 1,000 extension officers. Okay, some of whom will man the farmer services centers. And these farmer services centers was a novelty. The novelty was that you will be providing the farmers with all the equipment that they need, tractors and all of that. You'll be providing them with improved seeds. They will have the support of technology in order to improve weather forecasting and improve the work that they are doing. But you would incorporate a microfinance scheme, said that a farmer that just needs some 200 Ghana doesn't go to a shack, but can still take that money within the service. And all these required this staffing that was approved. And I do believe that one of these days we should be seeing that recruitment carried forward. In the public sector, there was also the thinking that we needed to strengthen internal audits of our institutions. And so agreement was also reached to recruit internal auditors for the internal audit agency. And even the internal audit service itself, there was a need to recruit more experienced and highly qualified chartered accountants to support the operations of the audit service. So all these things were done. And so even though we had this net freeze, it had to be now dealt with on a case-by-case basis. Teachers were recruited almost annually in order to support the teaching and learning. And so we didn't have this blanket check where you could just go around recruiting everybody, but you needed to recruit on a case-by-case basis in a way that the economy could support. But the focus was to give the private sector the opportunity. And that is why the focus of the IMF program on financial stability was critical, because that was what was going to drive down interest rates. And once interest rates drop, businesses have easy access to funding, and therefore they can expand and they can recruit more. And so if you are able to address this and the monetary policy regime begins to see a softening, then you will find that businesses will grow and will find a better environment to operate in and absorb more people, but not to look to the public sector, because that certainly is not sustainable. And I don't even believe that any government would risk looking to the public sector to provide the jobs.
Well, viewers, we are in a conversation with the Honorable Isaac Adongo, Member of Parliament for Bolgatanga Central, and we are talking about the International Monetary Fund. We're going to go on a short break, and when we come back, I'd like to find out from the Honorable Member of Parliament whether indeed he has seen the exit report. You know, the IMF was in town. They've held meetings with the Akufo-Addo government, and it is said that they have issued what is called an exit report. I found out from Honorable whether he's seen the exit report and what lies in the exit report for the people of Ghana. Short break.
It's a beautiful day. I'm gonna make most of it. It's a beautiful day. A day to share with you. You make my world go round. Yeah, yeah. It's really got me saying, NASCO brings home happiness, brings home happiness.
Experience the wide range of top quality and affordable electronics, phones, tablets, home and office appliances from NASCO. NASCO, bring home happiness.
Yeah, welcome back to Talk Time, and we are in the studio with the Honorable Isaac Adongo, Member of Parliament for Bolgatanga Central, and we are talking about the International Monetary Fund. Now, Honorable, have you seen the exit report of the IMF?
No. What I've seen is a statement issued by the Minister of Finance regarding their engagement with the IMF, but I haven't seen the entire report. But that statement, which you find even on the website of the Minister of Finance, is instructive. It's instructive in many ways because, to be honest with you, it doesn't tell us any new proposals that were put forward by the government, which were approved by the IMF. It doesn't. It mentions that they were lauded for proposed tax cuts. We don't know which tax cuts are those. If you read it, you don't find any specific tax cuts that they've lauded them about. But they agree that the IMF says the economy is still challenged. And when the IMF says the economy is still challenged, one of the key areas that you have to look for is external vulnerability. Prices of gold, prices of cocoa, and our key commodity prices, oil. We know Tullow shut down only recently in order to fix the turrets, and we suffered some output losses. Beyond that, the budgeted figure that we have for oil wasn't met. So revenue shortfalls was occasioned by these factors in 2016. Going into 2017, those challenges still exist. How are we going to fill that gap? is a major question that the fiscal consolidation effort must address. But it makes it very clear that they are still waiting for the MPP to draft policy proposals. It states very clearly there that they did not discuss comprehensive policy proposals, because it says they are waiting to support them draft policy proposals to deal with this. But the budget is supposed to come out hopefully early next month. So we're hoping that by then all the policy options would have been reviewed and would have been available. The other thing that it says is that it supports the government effort to audit outstanding obligations and commitments. Exactly the wording used by the finance minister over the 7 billion issue, contrary to the words used by His Excellency Dr. Bawumia, that 7 billion could not be accounted for. And I tend to side with the report. That report vindicates the minority caucus in Parliament that made a statement. My ranking member, Honorable Atuforsen, led us and read a statement and made it categorically clear that these were obligations and arrears and commitments. They were not unaccounted for monies. Again, it vindicates us from that propaganda by Honorable Osafumafu that we had misreported, and they were quoting some figures of misreporting that Ghana suffered a fee of some $25 million, and that was going to repeat itself. Unfortunately, this is not what we found. But it gives me the impression, and a very strong impression, that with fiscal consolidation being a major requirement, given that we now have a deficit of around 9%, fiscal space is going to be a very scarce commodity. Now, if fiscal space is going to be a scarce commodity, it means that government would have to come out with a program that is not tainted with delivering political promises to the neglect of the economy. The facts
there's something that I wanted to know. I mean, here we are. According to the Ministry of Finance says that the IMF finds that the challenge of mobilizing local resources is still there and is huge.
Yeah.
At the same time, the same ministry says that the IMF is satisfied with a promise to reduce taxes. How do the two fit?
That's why I'm saying that's a mirage. Let me tell you, they are still in the campaign mode. Obviously, the budget will come out. We are not going to see anything beyond scratching the surface. And scratching the surface is to look to the financial services tax, for instance, and take it off. When about 80% of Ghanaians are unbanked. So what is the impact of that? You know, you're going to look at lowering the threshold of SMEs. Okay, so you just have a few of them and you say, oh, we have reduced it to 3%. Okay, what will be the percentage of those SMEs compared to before, who were paying 17 and now have to pay charge 3% on their services? So yes, there will be some attempts to demonstrate that they've eliminated, but I can assure you that the key ones that formed the basis of their campaign promise will not be touched. For instance, the energy sector levy was described in many ways. In fact, anytime they discuss the price of utilities and price of fuel going up, they look to the energy sector levy and told us categorically that they will remove it. Now, if you don't remove the energy sector levy, what have you done? You haven't done anything. You haven't met a key strand of your promise. And I don't see that happening. The challenge of finding fiscal space is what is now fueling the attempt to look to 7 billion of outstanding obligations and commitments, to see what can be done about those ones in order to create a fiscal space within the capital budget. Don't forget that throughout the campaign, Bawumia said our capital budget was 1.6 billion, and that money was sitting there he was going to use. The 7 billion he's talking about is the equivalent of $1.6 billion. Is he suggesting that in addition to the 1.6 billion that was approved in the budget, we have overspent by another 1.6 billion, meaning our total budget spent for capital projects including commitment, is now 14 billion. Is that what he's saying? I don't believe so. If they want to convince us on that, then I would like to see a list of all the projects on which we spent the approved 7 billion and the various amounts that were spent, the sources of funding of those projects. And the other 7 billion that is unbudgeted and all of that, give us a complete list so that we know that it is not this project you are targeting to terminate. And I can assure you that with the exception of the 23 senior secondary schools that were funded by the World Bank project, all the other 100 of JM's e-blocks were funded from Government of Ghana resources. And these are some of the projects they are looking to terminate in order that they can build their own legacy. That is not good governance.
Okay. Now, Honorable, what do you expect in the 2017 budget? I understand that it will be read on the 3rd of March. What do you expect in the 2017 budget? Given the talks with the IMF, given the promises that were made, and given your understanding of the national economic situation, what should we be expecting in 2017 budget?
I expect a very tight budget. A very tight budget in the sense that there are certain elements within our budget that are given. You can't do anything about them. And I can just give you 2 examples. Our wage bill, now with a 12.5% increase that was agreed with the social partners, you will be expecting something in the region of 13 billion for wage bill. Our interest costs, you should be expecting something in the region of 11 to 12 billion. So that is already 25 billion. Last year, our total budget, including the deficit, was 50 billion. So you have just half of that left. Okay. If you take away the deficits of about 8.4 billion that was budgeted, what do you have left? Now, there are statutory funds that have to be met. And so, if you want to keep within this expenditure, and then add on, because you want to rationalize expenditures, but there's a little you can rationalize. You can't rationalize wages and salaries expenditure. You can't reallocate your interest component. In fact, your capital budget for those obligations and commitment, unless you want to go on the spree of terminating projects, that should be a given in the budget. Okay. So when you take all of that, where are the revenues going to come from? That is a very important question. So yes, there will be an effort to show semblance of meeting the overhyped promise of cutting taxes by scratching some surfaces. But in the end, the challenge will be how are they going to fill that loophole? When in their own manifesto, if you read page 15 of their manifesto, they say they will consistently work towards reducing government debts, not increasing government debt. So any effort to increase the budget deficits would be a clear violation of the social contract between the people of Ghana and the MPP as enshrined in their own manifesto. So I don't know how they're going to do it. But I can assure you that in the next few days, we will see a lot of propaganda that will paint a much more gloomer economy they inherited, that will paint a much more gloomer serializing of several holes here and there, serializing several contracts that are tainted in order to provide the justification for the things that they'll be doing and be presenting to us on 3rd March.
Honorable, there's been a lot of talk about the depreciation of the cedi. And since December, the cedi has moved from 4 cedis to $1 to 4 cedis, 45 pesos to $1. What accounts for this?
It's the uncertainty. I told you before. The uncertainty would have created a difficulty for inflows into the country to support.
Which uncertainty? Uncertainty associated with the election?
With the government's own pronouncements doesn't give a clarity on where they were going. You were lambasting the IMF, and the IMF is the reason some people have investments here. It's the reason some people want to bring money to Ghana. It's the reason some people believe that the projections of Ghana's economic growth and trajectory is such that they must participate in it, and therefore will bring money to Ghana. The uncertainty around several promises that ran contra to the IMF program, cutting everything tax, creates another challenge. People are wondering, how are you going to do it? The uncertainty of going on an expenditure drive, everything free, restoring everything and basically giving back everything, creates another dilemma. So people are not sure. Let's wait and see how these people will proceed. We want to see when they present their budget. So that uncertainty denies Ghana some inflows into the country. And that is one of the reasons we have this problem.
Well, so thank you very much
It's my
for coming
pleasure.
to the studio. Well, we've been talking to the Honorable Isaac Adongo, Member of Parliament for Bolgastanga Central, and we're talking basically about the state of the economy and the IMF. And the picture he paints is not a very glossy one, but be that as it may, this is Talk Time, coming to you from Pan-African Television, and we are grateful you allowed all of us into your home to share the thoughts of the Honorable Isaac Adongo. We hope to see you again very soon with another very interesting topic and an exciting personality. Until then, it's goodbye from all of us at Pan-African Television, our directors, the camera crew, the producers, the makeup artists, cameramen, everybody. Goodbye from all of us until we see you again very soon. Bye-bye.